So for my final project, I decided to focus on the general problem that laboratory biologists, research scientists in the life sciences, spend an enormous amount of time doing tasks that are highly repetitious and potentially very automatable. So I'm a biologist, I'm a bioengineer. This is the lab where I work. I spend a lot of time thinking about this already. So for my final project, I decided to pick one particular problem within this set of problems and see if I could come up with a way to do it better. So the issue that I decided to focus on specifically is one of keeping cells alive. So if you want to study a line of cells, you need to have those cells. You need them to be alive and healthy. So the way this is typically done is you just plate the cells out on the bottom of this flask like this, and you put a layer of media, so just food for the cells, on top, and you let them grow. So they'll grow to cover the bottom of the plate, and in only about 3 or 4 days, they will have grown to the point where they have eaten all the food in the liquid and have released a lot of waste and have no more space to grow. And the cells start to become unhealthy, and they will pretty quickly start dying after that. So what is done currently is every 3 to 4 days, the researcher will have to come back and remove all the old media, remove the cells, put the cells into new media, and put those into a new flask. This is a process that can take an hour to 2 hours, and it has to be done like clockwork every 3 or 4 days, or your cells will die. So it's an enormous sink on time, given that the vast majority of laboratory biologists do this or some variation on this process. So it's a very common problem. It takes a fair amount of time in an absolute sense, but also requires a level of consistency and punishes people for having to, if you want to travel for a week, it's very difficult to do that because you have to feed your cells in the time while you're gone. So this is what I decided to focus on, seeing if I can find a better way to keep cells alive than the current method.
To begin my exploration of this problem, I sat down with Sarah Hamill, who runs the undergraduate bioengineering teaching labs at SEAS and keeps up several cell lines throughout the year.
So how often do you have to go do this process for your job?
So renewing media definitely at least 2 to 3 times a week. Passaging the cells, that's at least once a week again. So you're working with the cells. At least you have to have a designated couple hours, 3 to 4 times a week to actually keep up your cell line.
How long does the process take?
So replacing the media, the whole protocol, you have to come in, warm up your media, depending on different circumstances, they can take about an hour, maybe a little less. But as far as passionate doing the cell goes, what I tell students is definitely have a 2-hour block of time where you're not going to be interrupted.
Would it be useful if you had a device that would just sort of like a chemostat keep the cells at a constant density, and then you could pull them out and use them whenever you wanted? Would that be helpful?
That would probably, I think that'd be crazy. I think it'd be so helpful that labs would take it on if it was, an accessible product. I think labs would definitely take that on. It would cut down time that you need to passage. It would cut down the amount of people interacting with the cell lines. It would cut down contamination. It would cut down a lot of external factors that, might contribute to losing your cell line or, not having as robust a cell line as you need.
During my explorations of this project, I came to realize that researcher time wasn't the only cost to the current system. In addition to spending several hours per week keeping a cell line alive, researchers only have access to the cells a fraction of the time because immediately after passaging them, the cells are at too low density to be used for any experiments. Thus, convenience and ease of access became equally important criteria in designing a solution to this problem. With these criteria in mind, I developed several concepts to solve this problem. The first idea was to create a conveyor belt which would make a continuum of space for the cells to grow on. By slowly advancing the belt over time, the cells could be exposed to new area and new space to grow. At the front of the track, new space would be revealed to allow new cells to grow, and at the back of the track, old cells would be swept off and disposed of. The difficulty with this design is that the cells still require new food, so the researcher still has to come back to replace the media at a regular basis. Additionally, it's more mechanically complicated than I would like, especially given that the device has to be submerged at all times in media. My next thought was to rotate the container instead of moving the cells on a belt. I decided to use a glass sphere, or orb, and place the cells and media at the bottom. Then, by slowly rotating the sphere, new area would be exposed coming down one side, and dead cells still adhered to the bottom would be pulled up the other side. This achieved the same purpose as the conveyor belt, but removed the mechanical complexity and solved the problem of having actuators inside the media. The final design I settled on kept the concept of rotation, but used it in a cylinder instead of a sphere. The basic concept of replenishing the area available to the cells remains, but the surface area available to the cells per volume is much higher than in the sphere. Additionally, the cylindrical shape makes it easier to solve the problem of refreshing the media. By adding a valve to the side of the cylinder, every time the valve lines up with tubing on the actuator, the media can be drained. The cells which are still adhering to the cylinder will not be swept out with the media. Then, from a different valve, or potentially from the same valve, new media can be pumped in to refresh the old stock. I've drawn it here as two valves, but it could easily be operated through the same valve. The pace of the media removal and replacement is set by the period of rotation. Because the valve only drains and replaces the media once per cycle, the timing can be adjusted based on the speed of rotation.
So the final concept ends up looking something like this. A cylinder with cells and media on a thin layer on the bottom is slowly rotated by an actuator, represented by my hand here, which reveals new area coming down the front and pulls dead cells, which are still stuck to the side, up and out of the media on the back. A brush at the top would then clean the dead cells off before it rotated around to reveal new area. So this gives the cells all the room they need to grow. The next step is to refresh the media. So a valve located on the end, every time it comes into contact once per cycle with tubing on the actuator, would vacuum out the old media and leaving the cells still stuck to the bottom, and then dispense new media on top. This can continue, as long as there's a reservoir of new media, this can continue to keep the cells alive more or less indefinitely. A final feature to make this even more useful for lab scientists is, instead of just keeping cells alive, this system can be used to keep the cells at exactly the density you want for experiments. So with the traditional flask, you tend to seed them at a lower concentration than you would use them and let them grow to a higher concentration. So there's only a period in the middle where they're actually at a useful density. And by placing an optical sensor on the bottom, you can detect the density of the cells on the substrate and then increase the rate of rotation or slow it down in response to the density, such that you can keep it at a steady state right where it's useful. So speeding up rotation would thin the cells out because they wouldn't have enough time to grow to meet the new media, and slowing it down would give them a chance to catch up and density would increase. So using this feedback loop, the cells could be constantly ready at exactly the density and at full healthy growing state for experiments. And then any time of the day or night when I need it, a researcher can just come in and remove this tube from the actuator and have cells ready to go right here in a usable form already.